I'm recording to
The
the
cloud. Yeah, like I think you get a link. It like saves it. Well, you could either have it saved to your hard drive or saved to like a Zoom area where you can take the file and share it with somebody.
So this is being saved to the cloud. So if you want to, hi, Emily. Everyone say hi to Emily, who's going to watch this later. If you want to open a sample 1098T, there's a little link up there on the top. So the 1098T form is a statement that colleges and universities are required to issue to certain students. Provides the total dollar amount paid by the student for what is referred to as qualified tuition and related expenses, or QTRE in the biz, for a single tax year. So I don't know, Kevin, it's been like 2 or 3 years that we have changed to reporting paid instead of billed.
Yeah, this will be the second year that we report in box 1 as opposed to box 2.
So that's important. If anyone calls and they're like, hey, 3 years ago, you reported to me what was billed, it was required for all schools to change to report what was paid a couple of years ago. So we made that switch to be compliant. Students can claim an educational credit for qualified education expenses paid by cash, check, credit, or debit card, or paid with money from a loan. If the student pays the expenses with money from a loan, they take that credit the year they paid the expenses, not the year they get the loan or the year they repay the loan. Does that make sense to everyone? So it's the year the loan pays those expenses. So if they got the loan later, whatever, you understand. So this, the credit can be claimed by a student or spouse if they file a joint return, or a parent who can claim the student as a dependent. So like Jason and I claim Emily Porter as a dependent, so we can use her 1098T on our taxes. We don't get anything because she has tuition remission, but just as an example, Jason and I could use that on our tax return. So what is QTRE? Qualified tuition and related expenses are amounts paid for tuition, fees, and other related expenses for an eligible student. QTRE does not include room and board, fines, health fees. So in general, it's your tuition and your mandatory fees. Any questions so far before I turn it over to Kevin?
Yeah, about the payment, is that live? Like, how we used to post at a certain date, in this case, when a parent pays, whether the billing has posted or not, will it show the date that they paid? Or
yeah, so that's a good question, Marlene, because they're in things are changing a little bit with CX and Workday. So last year was transition year number 1. This is kind of transition year number 2. And then transition year number 3 next year is going to be a lot easier and more fun, and you will have a lot of more information that students will be able to see. But basically, I think what you're asking about is in CX land, which we were in CX in spring 20, students and parents made payments in December for charges that we waited to post until after January 1st, because remember, in CX world, we kind of had like a linear posting where it was like, we're posting fall, and now we stop posting fall, and we're in a new semester and we start posting spring, and everything was very, linear, sequential in that way. So somebody who made a payment in December of 2019 toward a charge that did not post until January of 2020, they got credit for that payment when they made the payment in December of 2019, because CX knew that the student had an eligible charge that was coming up to be posted in the first 3 months of the new year. And that's a box on the 1098T acknowledging that a payment was received for a charge that came up between January and March of the new year. So that payment, if a student made a payment in December of 2019, even though the charge didn't actually hit in CX until January of 2020, then that 2019 payment they got credit for on their 2019 1098T. And so that payment would not be, even though they have that charge in 2020, they've already had a payment that's applied towards some of those charges. So CX kind of does the math and says, hey, you already got some payment toward these charges. So even if you have a new payment in this year that exceeds what those charges were, we know you've already gotten credit for it in your last year's 1098-T, and you're not going to get it again in this year's 1098-T. So of course, new semesters come where it's not to say they won't get credit for other periods, but if they fully paid off spring in December, then it would have been on last year's 1098-T, not this year's 1098-T. And as I was saying December 19, I was saying that on purpose because I'm talking about, that transition last year, when we were still using CX. So now in Workday, it's a little bit different because for the majority of spring charges, we're actually posting in December as well. So for December of 2020, for spring 21 charges, most of those were posted in December and then payments were received in December. So likewise, those payments will be on the 2020 1098-T because the payment happened in December. Now, if they got billed in December but didn't pay until January, then the payment will be in 2021, and that payment will be on the 2021 1098-T. So I hope I'm not confusing you with all these date references. I've kind of jumped around, but the point is it's following the payments. That's the new thing about box 1 versus when we were box 2. I see, Stacy, you're asking a question. Or ready
Yes.
to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question. So does what you were saying, is that the same for a student? Let's say they had an outstanding balance from 2018 but never paid, but then decided to pay. Are they still getting a T98-T form because
Yes.
they paid late? Okay.
Yeah, so the payment they're paying is paying eligible charges even if they're from the past. And so we'll talk a little bit about that in our, when I show you the approach of what we're doing with 1098-Ts this year. But yes, that's correct.
Alicia, you have a question?
Yeah, just real quick. I'm still getting W-9S forms coming in. Is that still okay, Kevin?
Yes, that is okay, and we can continue to process them. The main thing about the the W-9S is, are receiving a social security number for a student who hadn't provided us a social security number. So we identified those who had one missing and contacted them to try to get it. So we're continuing to get those. That W-9S will be important for when we do our tax filing for 1098-Ts, which will happen. I think it's like the beginning of March is when we'll send the file to the IRS. And so really anytime up until then, we can continue to update them. Now, it may be that we generate a 1098-T then for a student who didn't have a social security number, and then we add a social security number. So I think we technically could regenerate them at 1098-T if we wanted to. I don't know that we have to, but after we do the tax filing, I think we'll still want to continue because for the new year, we'll want to have a social security number for that student as well. So we can continue to process them. We would just have to determine after we do our tax filing if we need to send any sort of amendment to the IRS now that we have their tax, their TIN. So.
All right. Any other
All right.
questions? It's like we're good. Go ahead, Kev.
And I'm sure there will be more questions as we get kind of into the meat of this. So I am on one laptop screen, so I will try to navigate the best that I can given the circumstances. So let's talk first about the concept for 1098-Ts this year. We've already talked about how we're a box, we report on box 1 now. And just to give you a little more background, and we probably talked about this last year, but all schools used to have the option to report on box 1 and box 2. So it was like, I'm a box 1 school or a box 2 school. And then they changed the rules and said, box 2 doesn't exist anymore. Everybody has to be a box 1 school. So last year, hopefully kind of cleaned out a lot of that transition. I remember when parent who was really excited about the change and said, well, next year you're going to do it right. And it was like, well, we're kind of doing it right this year. It's just that it's different than what you've experienced in the past. So, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. In that transition, as we've mentioned, is all about payments towards qualified tuition related. We were, bless you, Cindy, we were reporting charges that we charged to students, and now we're recording payments that we received. Now, those payments are limited, as Molly said, by QTRE, or qualified tuition and related expenses. So if you pay, for an undergraduate student, maybe there's $25,000 worth of charges in a semester, about $20,000 for tuition and fees, and then $5,000 for room and board. Now you pay that full $25,000 because that's what you owe the school, but only $20,000 of those payments is toward qualified tuition and related expenses. So when you get a Box 1 reporting, you would get the reporting on that $20,000, because even though you've paid the school $25,000, you're limited by the sum of the qualified tuition and related expenses. So that's where it's important, for somebody who, maybe gets a lot of financial aid and then makes a payment and they're like, well, I made this payment. And it's like, yeah, I recognize that you made that payment, but you're capped by qualified tuition and related expenses. And so that's why, even though you gave us more money than what's showing in Box 1, it's because you paid for other things that aren't qualified tuition and related expenses. So, and then again, we're following the date of the payment. So if you pay in January toward in January of 2020 toward a fall 19 charge, then that payment came in 2020. So you get the reporting in 2020. You didn't get it in 2019 because you didn't pay. And so you got to see a glimpse of Quinn real quick. I thought I locked the door, but so remember, it's when we receive the payments. And so even if that payment comes from a really long ago period, then that payment should still count in the current year. So there's a couple of pieces with us having transitioned where, the system may not have been configured in a way that always accurately capture the balance period that's associated with payments. And so there could be a time where maybe you think that it should be included that it's not calculating, and we can talk a little bit about that. But Cindy, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just curious, if they're making a payment in 2020 for a previous session, how does the system know how much of that payment is qualified tuition versus not qualified expenses?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think that if we had been on Box 1 reporting the whole time, I think maybe I can speak to it moving forward. Workday has kind of a carryover balance that it uses to calculate what is remaining eligible to be paid in the new year once we process a 1098-T. So it's kind of counting up like, what did you pay? What didn't you pay? Is there a carryover of eligible charges? And then we'll include that in next year's calculation. So even the IRS recognized that the transition from Box 2 to Box 1 reporting could cause some payments to potentially get lost, and probably in some cases to be overpaid as well. So, or overreported as well. So, it's not perfect, because the way that CX did it is there was a balance period or a semester associated with each payment. Well, when it didn't matter as much, we didn't fine tune the transitions between fall and spring in a way that every single payment posted to the correct period. Now, Workday has some configuration that's a little bit smarter, I think, than what we've experienced in the past. And so, I think that the machine of Workday is going to handle these 1098-T calculations even better than what we've had in the past. So that's where you could find something that seems a little bit off. And if we show that it's off, and if we think that there's a reason to change it, we can make edits to the 1098-T. So there's always that. If a parent proves their point and we also agree that that should be changed, then we can make an adjustment.
Great, thank you.
Sure. So, okay, I'm gonna talk myself out of time here if I don't get moving on the agenda. So let me just give you real quick a conceptual approach to how we are generating 1098Ts this year, because again, this is a transition year. It's the only year, hopefully in a really long time, that we will be charging students in one system and collecting payments in that system and then transitioning to a new system in the same year. Now, because it's a transition year, you know, we may have gotten payments. A student may have not paid all of their spring, gone into Workday, and then made a payment in Workday toward those spring charges. And we want that payment to count toward their CX charges. Likewise, a student may have made a CX payment this summer to prepay for fall, and Workday didn't capture that payment, but we need it to count toward paying fall charges. So basically what we had to do is a DIY 1098T this year that said, hey, let's run 1098T data in CX and have CX spit out what it calculates for that half of the year, what the 1098T is. And then let's write a report in Workday to look at charges that originated from Workday and payments that posted to Workday. And that's excluding any net conversion charges or payments. Then by definition is an item that came from CX and then converted into Workday, right? So we don't want to double count the net conversion items because they're already getting counted on the CX side. So we're basically, it's like take CX data, add Workday data, and then build your own 1098T. And so then when we took those reports together for students, then we basically did our own calculations of what box 1 and 5 and 6 and all of those boxes that are on the 1098T, what those values should be. And then we did a load of all of those values into Workday. So that's basically, what we did. We determined what the amount should be based on CX and Workday data. We loaded it into Workday, and now we can generate a 1098T for students. And so what that means is that this year, the information, because we loaded 1098T information in Workday instead of creating 1098Ts from Workday, some of the information that students will be able to see next year is not necessarily in there in Workday right now. And as I go through a few of the screens, I might be able to explain that a little bit better for you. But basically, for those of you who looked at the CX Analyze 1098T detail reports, which kind of helped us to track, like, when did this payment get received? What period did it apply toward? What amount goes toward box 1 or box 5? All of that was kind of helpful to explain 1098T calculations. This year, Workday does have a very similar way to analyze 1098T data, but because we had to load the data and Workday wouldn't give us accurate amounts anyway, because we've recognized the fact that, net conversion balance kind of double dips the payments or charges that a student has. And it also, all of those transactions, even if they're for prior periods, if they're from fall 2018, the transaction happened this year in Workday. So in the detail report, it would have made it look like all of those payments got received in this year. So, when we first generated a 1098T out of Workday, it's like, oh, this person has $140,000 of charges and $140,000 of payments. And I was like, whoa, that's not true. It's just looking at the history of the student and dumping it all into the current year. So this year, all that to say that this year is special and a little bit tricky. And next year we'll get to talk about, hey, now it's another transition year for us because everything was in Workday, but now everything's going to be pretty and easy and all that sort of fun stuff. So bear with us one more year as we work through another transition year, and then we'll do something similar to this in another year or so. So basically, because we kind of lose some of that analyze detail report that we're used to having in the past to make sense of the numbers, what we basically have in place of that is kind of a giant spreadsheet of our 1098T calculations. And I think, Melissa and I should probably try to figure out what might be the most helpful to you guys. But at the end of the day, that's going to be the background information that speaks to the 1098T. That will show us what the calculations are that contribute to the 1098T values. I would just say with that we did, start with CX, like I was saying. And so the information on the CX Analyzed Detail report still is valid. That's the information we were going off of. And then if you look into Workday, we're looking at what their Workday charges are. So any fall 20 charges or any payments that posted directly into Workday that were actually Workday payments, not net conversion balance payments. So, there is information in both CX and Workday that will help you get to the numbers if somebody's asking about it. But this spreadsheet's really going to be like what drives the information that got loaded into Workday. So I know that that's a little bit overwhelming. I just wanted to make sure that you guys understood that we couldn't just go into Workday and say generate a 1098T because Workday, because of the conversion, just wouldn't be able to consume that information in the correct way to create a 1098T this year. So, however, the 1098T is housed in Workday, so that's kind of the new piece for us. So, so with all that said, why don't we go into Workday now? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So you guys can see my sandbox screen, is that correct? Okay. So, and then bear with me as I kind of go back and forth between a few of my windows. But so I'll just start off by saying, probably the easiest way for you to see what you have available to you is to just type 1098 into your search box. You could also type 1098T, 1098-T, but if you did 1098 space T, then nothing would show up. So, Workday likes exact matches and partial matches. So that's why just 1098 can work. I have probably a few more tasks and reports than you do, but we will just want to verify that you guys have the ones that are specified on the agenda. So the main ones that you would need are view student 1098T, view 1098T box details for student, print 1098T, and then I believe that you have this managed consent for removal from 1098T mass print as well. Does
Evan,
anybody
what did you
not
type
have
again?
these?
What did you type again? Just 1098T?
Just 1098.
Okay, yeah, the T didn't work. Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Dash T would work, but space T does not work. So is anybody not seeing some of these that I mentioned? Cool. Well, that is good news. We thought we got the security in place, but it's always good to verify with everybody. So, okay, cool. So, so I'm going to go ahead and view student 1098T. So view student 1098T is your the way that you can actually view a single student's 1098T, and I'm going to use my favorite first letters of the alphabet guy. And so basically, if you click the student's name, or you could do the stu-ID when you're searching, then you'll get the student's 1098T information. And so what you can see here, and just take a mental note of this, that you can see basically all of the profile information that shows up on the 1098T, as well as what their box values are. So one thing that you see here is it says box value 1 is overridden, yes, and then what the box value 1 override is. So that is the student's box 1 value for their 1098T. Now, why I said to take a mental note of that is it looks, it's kind of a lot of boxes here and maybe a little bit confusing. When the student goes to run their own View 1098T task, which we'll look at together, then they will only see the box one value. They won't see that it's been overridden. They won't see a 0 in the box one value. So it's a little bit cleaner for the student experience than the administrator experience, where, you know, this is just indicating to us that we have overridden the value. And because we loaded all 1098T data into Workday, we did not generate the 1098T out of Workday. Nobody's going to have a Workday generated box one value. Everybody's going to be in the override field. So, you know, if we were to go in and make an adjustment and actually override an individual student's 1098T, that would also be an override. But because of the way we had to load 1098T data, pretty much everything's in an override. And Cindy, just to note the carryover value, we can see, you know, we can see here that Workday calculates that this student has an additional $10,264 of carryover value. So that's probably from spring 21 charges that had been placed in December of 20 that haven't been paid yet. So that's what's going to be eligible to be paid in the new year. So again, you know, this should all be accurate, but I think as we get further into full cycles in Workday, then these values are really going to like come out to us and make a lot more sense. So, so that's the first
Kevin, that
task.
would
That's,
include a CX carryover value as well, though.
yes, good point. So we did need to calculate because they could have unpaid charges in CX that could be eligible to be paid in the new year. So we did calculate a carryover value for CX. Thanks for putting that in, Melissa. So this is basically just the view in Workday of 1098T information. So if somebody just says, if they go to their task and want to view 1098T information, this is essentially what they'll see. Again, I'll show it to you, but they just wouldn't have all these override values. Now, the other thing that we could do for a student is the print 1098T. And so if we go there and we type in Matabang, and then we search the year. Now, just because the year shows up, it doesn't mean that the student has a 1098T for all of those years. If you choose any year prior to 2020, it's going to say that the student doesn't have a 1098T for the prior year. Any prior 1098Ts will still be housed in ECSI. Students will not be able to get 2019, 2018 1098Ts at Workday. But if they were here and had an academic record in those years would show up as options. It will just error out when they put that other number in. So we're going to go ahead and put 2020, and then we're going to say done. And it says your PDF is being generated. So it just takes a minute to come in, and it'll come to your alerts here. Oh, there we go. I could have just waited. So basically, you know, the print 1098T is just going to do just that. It will deliver a printed version of the 1098T to your inbox. And from here, we can see there's page 1 and page 2. So it's the entire front and back of the 1098T, and it just puts it in the 1098T form. And so, you know, if you needed to print out a 1098T for somebody or mail or email a 1098T, then this is the way that you can do it. You can go to your print task. That's this print 1098T task is under you and your profile. You're not doing it as the student, you're doing it as a staff person. And so it's going to your inbox. It's not going to the student's inbox if you use the print task. So does that make sense? It's just your way to actually get a printed document of a 1098T there. So pretty easy, right?
Yes.
Can I ask one question really quick? I'm so sorry. Okay, just so I'm following. So you were on the screen with the student. Where did you go to get to the print? But I'm sorry, I missed that one.
No, I actually wasn't on the screen as a student. I did that kind of fast. Sorry, Alicia. I typed in 1098 again. And one of my options was print 1098T.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. It's right there then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first one we looked at was view student 1098T,
Right. Okay.
and you can only get there through this task. You don't have a related action off the student to get there. You have to go to this task to view the 1098T or go to the task to print the 1098T.
Got it. Thank you.
Somebody is. calling there. Decline. I'm using my phone for my audio. So, okay, so that's pretty easy, right? Pretty self-explanatory. It's just giving you all of the 1098T data. And then the other item that I'll show you is the view 1098T box details for students. And this is kind of a little bit of I just want to show you it because I think that you see this task in your, if you search 1098T as well. But from here, oh, and he's kind of interesting because I wonder if I generated, maybe he's a bad example. Does anybody have a favorite student that we want to look at? I know you all have favorite students.
Cade Terry?
Cade Terry, oh, he's come up. I feel like he might have been generated too. You know, we're in Sandbox right now, and Sandbox is a little bit different right now than what it's going to be when we actually generate. Could I get one more? Because I think I did generate Cade Terry, ironically. Alana Burgum?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is interesting, and maybe Melissa, do you know, I thought that when we loaded, we wouldn't get any box details for students. I thought that only came when we generated directly in Workday.
It's likely that Workday still needs to capture all of the payments and charges to date so that it doesn't recount them, specifically the charges for carryover.
Right.
Because it's going to say, you know, up until, let's say we still charge for the spring semester today, and we upload those 1098Ts that day, then those are charges that are being counted on the 2020 1098T and shouldn't be counted on the 2021. And so it just speaks to the timing, like we have of when we need to generate our reports out of Workday, because I think what it's doing is it's capturing all of the qualified charges to know what to include, what was already included on the 2020 1098T, but then what will need to be included for 2021, right? Because we could still be charging for the spring semester as we continue on into 2021.
Yeah, and I think that this report is kind of similar to the CX Analyze Detail report, because even if you generated a 1098T in CX and you went later and ran the Analyze Detail report, it's like pulling up the data at that point in time. So I think that that's how, and apologies to everybody, this is all a little bit new to all of us. So I thought this was all going to be blank because we had loaded the information. However, it's not. It's just showing you how Workday would evaluate this student for 1098T. But what you can see here is that this like box one value calculation is 68,000 for this student, but we did an override value of 44,000 for this student. So this is what's being reported on the 1098T, even though Workday is saying that, you know, this is the amount that could be counted. So it's a little bit, you know, this is a transition year thing where this screen will be very, very helpful in the future. This year, it's probably going to be not so helpful because it's only capturing Workday data, but it's also including these net conversion balances, which we, you know, had to exclude from our calculation because we pulled in what we got from CX. So,
yeah,
so,
Kevin, I think
sorry, go ahead.
if you just to clarify there, in that screen, the only net conversion items that Workday is counting are payments. We weren't able to exclude those.
Right.
But when it comes to charges, those are actually only the Workday charges. So when you look at this example for Box, the student may have made, I think it was $68,000 of payments, which would have included payments done in CX. So it's not totally
yeah, and that's where you
correct.
can see these net conversion here. Right.
But then they only have regular workday charges of like 40,000, which their payments have to be limited to their qualified charges, right? So I think our box one is actually more than 40,120 when we overrode it, which it is. And that's because we needed to take into account their qualified charges that happened in CX. So I just, it's like those charges that happened in CX are not going to be summarized anywhere in this view, but it is going to give you an idea of the charges that we use in Workday to help bring us to that $44,000. So we likely, and you can see that we have a carryover value of another $14,000, which again is going to be that combination of CX charges remaining and Workday charges remaining. And it's probably, for this particular student, I would guess that carryover amount is like the rest of their spring charges that haven't been paid.
Yeah. So all that to say that this screen does have some helpful information, but because of the transition this year, it'll be a lot better next year.
Can I ask a question? So if
Yeah.
someone calls, like one of the advisors, is it, now that it's in our house, is it something that they need to, like if someone feels like the numbers are wrong, is it their job to go through this now with them or no? Like before we used to say, it's not, it's just a number that was, I don't know. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think that, throughout the cycle of 1098Ts, I think each of us get into some conversations where it's a little bit hard to make sense of the numbers, right? And we want to do the best that we can to help them out. What I would say that at the end of the day, looking at the CX transaction summary, the CX statements from spring and summer, in addition to looking at your Workday statements from fall, the sum of all of those is what is the final number for what we're reporting on the 1098T. So if somebody says, I want to look line by line at what's included in this, then let's get them their CX transaction summary from, the first of the year until we transitioned, have them look at their Workday account, and then make sense of those numbers. So they have the tools to get to these numbers. I know that the way that we're talking about it and approaching it sounds a little bit overwhelming because we don't have a good single resource for it anymore. But basically, if we take the CX Analyze Detail report, which we all still have access to CX, we still can look in that. That's what we started with. And then in addition to that, we looked at charges that we charged in Workday and payments that we received in Workday. So from a very basic level, that's what we did in order to get this. So all of the information is readily available to all of us. It's just understanding what that, kind of simplified approach is to it.
Yeah, and if I can just add, so Alicia, the short answer is yes, advisors should be working with students if they question the numbers, but we can provide support to the advisors if it's just, complicated. Come to me, I can reach out to Kevin if I'm not clear. So, but yes, it's our responsibility to help the student understand what's in the 1098T.
And usually Katie is a good person too. She always has helped the advisors, at least on the TUG side, try to decipher and interpret 1098Ts if we can, or we get stuck.
And she loves to prove people wrong too.
Yeah.
So she really digs into the details.
Yes, all true. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna keep going ahead because I want to make sure that we get to the student experience as well. So those are the basic screens. I think the one that I did not talk to you yet about, and this is actually a good transition to the student experience, but there's a managed consent for removal from 1098T mass print, a beautifully worded Workday statement. They like to get very robotic sometimes. And so, basically, as far as how the consent works, when students do onboarding in a new calendar year, then they get presented with an onboarding question that says, would you like to opt into electronic, do you consent to electronic delivery for your 1098T? And most people, when they read it, would be like, yeah, sure, whatever. I just want to get past this answer, and that sounds convenient. So sure, I'll do electronic. And but if they fail to answer that question, then the next time they onboard in the year, onboarding will ask them that question again, because Workday says that every year I need the students to answer this question, but if they don't answer it, then I will continue to ask them until they answer it or until that year's over. And then when we're in a new year, they will ask them that question again. So each year's consent to electronic delivery for 1098T is communicated from the student to us through their onboarding process every year, but only once per calendar year. So in that first onboarding in the spring, if they say, yes, I want electronic delivery, then they will not see that question in their next onboarding in that calendar year, but they would the following calendar year because they need to consent each year. So basically this managed consent for removal from 1098T mass print would be if a student says, hey, I opted into electronic delivery, but I want to get a paper statement and I want you to send me a paper statement. They could always go into Workday and print a paper statement, even if they get electronic delivery. I mean, that's just part of what's given to them in Workday. But we can change or maintain the student's decision. So if Alana said, for 2020, I do not want electronic delivery, we can see here that the student consented, so we know that the student did this. If we uncheck the box and hit OK, then the student would become somebody that we print a 1098T for. So students also have this self-service task, so we probably won't really need to do this for a student. But if a student has a question, hey, I don't know if I consented or not, then if you run this task, then you can see if the box is checked, then they had consented. If they did not do the onboarding step at all, then you actually get like a error message saying you can't maintain one for somebody who hasn't given us an answer this year, like who didn't do it through onboarding. And Workday tells you that. So if you go in and the student errors out, then they probably still have that onboarding task in their inbox in Workday and have not responded to that. So so it's just, you know, it's good to know about this task so that you can see what somebody's electronic delivery option is. We don't have another way to find that out in Workday at this point. So this is the one way that you can do that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start proxy so that we can view the student experience here. So I'm going to go to Matabang. And remember, this is Sandbox. You all have the ability to proxy in as students in Sandbox, so you can follow along here. You can, if you're talking to a student later on, you can view them in Sandbox this way. So I'm here in as Matt, and I think Monique, well, I don't think everybody's gotten the instructions, but some of this stuff is going to come in some of the instructions that we're developing to send out to parents, and you'll have access to that, and students, and you'll have access to that as well. So if I go in as Matt and I click on finances, then you do have to click on more. You know, this is just a collapse screen, and since there's more rows than this, you have to click on more. And then we've got a couple of things here. We've got view my 1098T and print my 1098T. So if the student clicks on view my 1098T, Workday knows that there's only a 1098T for this student for 2020 in this screen. I know that before there were other year options that we could choose, but here, Workday did know that there's only a 1098T generated for the student for 2020. So if they go here and click OK, then this looks very familiar, right? We've got all the profile information at the top, and then we've got the box values at the bottom. And what you can see here, like I mentioned before, is that these box values are on, it doesn't show the override flag, and it doesn't show that the original box value is $0. It just shows what the final box value is for the student. So it's basically just giving them all of their 1098T information in a Workday screen here. And then they can click here if they want to go ahead and print their 1098T. And doing that from this screen is the same. When we saw the view 1098T option for the student, there was a print 1098T option for the student. Clicking this button to print it is the same as if they had clicked the print. And I'll go back and show you that link too. But okay, 0 seconds ago, this was created. So now in Matt's inbox, he has a printed version of a 1098T, which he can print, he can download an email, whatever he wants to do with this 1098T, he can do here now that he's got it in his inbox. So like I said, if Matt was back here, clicked on finances, hit more, and then hit print my 1098T, it's the same. And here you do see the options. He does have more than just 2020 here, but if he clicks it like this, then it will be delivered to his inbox just like the last one was. So any questions about that part of the student experience? It's pretty straightforward. One other thing I'll show you is that, students may get savvy and say, hey, I'm just going to search 1098 because I don't see the button and I just am a searching person. I'm Google-ized. Then you can see there's actually a couple more options here that we did not see before. We see the print and view 1098T, which are the two that we just went over. And then there's the managed paperless 1098T. This looks very familiar, right? This is just like what we looked at when we were looking at the administrator access. From here, the student can go ahead and maintain their own delivery options. So if a student said, hey, I signed up for electronic delivery and I don't want electronic delivery, they can search 1098, they can go to manage paperless, and they can change their decision here. Likewise, if they said, oh, I think I forgot to do electronic delivery, I said no, but I actually wanted it, then they can go back and maintain it this way, and they can say, I want to go paperless for this year. Workday got a little bit more terminology friendly on the student experience here than our administrator view. It's go paperless this year, yay. So the other option, if they search 1098, is my 1098T box details. So we probably could get this my 1098T box details in that drop down for the student. Although this year, I don't think it actually helps that much because of the transition and all of the things we've talked about with the 1098. But the thing is that when you remember, we had all that junk that I said, I guess not junk because some of it's useful information. It's just a little bit hard to decipher. But the student equivalent view actually here just shows kind of the different boxes and what their values are. So there's not really any value add, I think, for students and parents this year in this screen. But it doesn't hurt for them to be able to find it and see it either. So what I'm going to be interested in, I think that I did kind of see it before, but I think this is where once we do generate 1098Ts out of Workday, we might be able to get, I think because it's an override value, that's where we lost the detail of what the payments were, what the charges were, what the total amounts are. But I think that moving forward after this transition year, I think that this screen is actually going to be helpful, and we may want to move it into the student's menu as an option. So that's basically what a student has the ability to do here, to view their 1098T, to print their 1098T. They can search 1098T to manage paperless, and then if they search 1098T, they'll also see this My Box details, which again kind of gives them information that they already got in the view screen. So any questions about the student experience?
Kevin,
have a question.
what's the easiest way to explain to a parent the definition of the override in that document? If they look up the
So so if they happen to, I think this is the one place right now that students and parents might see that it's an override. What I would just say is we transitioned from one financial system this year to another, and so the way that we had to generate 1098Ts in Workday was a combination of two systems. So the way that we did it was to override the values and to load those values into Workday.
So once it's all in, Workday override probably won't be a term that we'd use, or do you see that in the future too?
Yeah, I think in general, Workday is going to do the heavy lifting of the calculations and the work for 1098T values. I think there will be very few times where we actually have to override a value in Workday. If something, yeah, I really don't think, unless there was some sort of like external payment that didn't get counted for some reason that we needed to count, you know, we probably won't need to override values in Workday after this year.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, Stacy.
How long do students have, well, I guess students can have access to this as long as they have their user ID and their password, no matter how far in advance they graduate, they can always come back to this and file their taxes if, let's say, they didn't file their taxes for a few years. And then for past students as well who've never used Workday, they just need their user ID and password, then they can access this.
Yeah, and that's a good question because, you know, there's going to be students this year that maybe graduated in spring and never really were in Workday. And so, you know, even Workday itself is kind of a new concept to them. But this is where we have their 1098T house. So one thing that we're doing is I sent a list of 1098T students to ITS, and they're cross-checking Workday account creation with the list of students with the 1098T. And so it's actually kind of interesting because of the way the onboarding kicked off, I think there are quite a few students that went through an onboarding process in Workday that never used Workday as a student because they maybe graduated in the spring or the summer, but because they had been introduced to Workday and gotten tasks for onboarding, like there are students that logged into Workday that we probably, you know, at face value might not have expected them to log into Workday. So it'll really help inform us, you know, who are there any students that don't have a student account, and, you know, what can we do for those students to make sure that they get in. Most likely, if a student didn't ever log into Workday and didn't get a student account, they're probably on our paper run. I mean, they almost certainly would be on our paper run. So those students would get a paper printed 1098T because they never consented to electronic delivery because they were never in Workday. So that kind of helps it to say that, hey, if you weren't really engaged in that way and never did Workday, then you're probably going to get a paper document sent to you anyway. And then moving forward in the future, they still can get logged into Workday. And so that's where working with ITS to make sure that they're ready for those calls of like, hey, I'm supposed to go to Workday, but I never logged in. I don't know how to get in. Then they can be prepared to answer those questions and help them get logged in.
Perfect. Thank you.
And past
Yeah,
students
sure.
still have access to their 1098Ts through ECSI still. And we've confirmed
Yeah,
that will
yes.
be ongoing.
Correct. Yep. So let me just make sure. I think that we talked about the Workday tasks here. The only thing we haven't talked about yet is the timeline. So the plan is that what we have in Sandbox should pretty much all be accurate. We wanted to run one more Workday report just to capture, you know, make sure that we have all the most fresh transactions. And so we're going to do another report in combination with the CX report to actually do the load midweek next week. So we're planning on loading into production on the 20th, the 1098T values. Sandbox refreshes Friday nights. And so I think what we would do probably on Tuesday, as we prepare to do the final load of 1098T data into Workday, part of that, you know, getting that loaded, we'll be doing a load into Sandbox to make sure that everything loads in properly. So at some point on Tuesday, we should have 1098T data back in Sandbox. So today, you know, we've got information in Sandbox today. So if you wanted to take a look and go through the student experience yourself, then you can do that in Sandbox. And then we'll get a new load again next week as we prepare for the final load into production. And then once it's in production, when we get the sandbox refresh next Friday, we'll have all of the 1098T data in sandbox after next week too. So all that to say, there could be a period of time on Tuesday where if you were to search 1098Ts, you might not see anybody. But once we get, this final load into sandbox, then you'll be able to proxy in as students in sandbox and get that whole experience. Right now, if you search 1098Ts in production, you won't get any results because we haven't loaded 1098Ts into production yet. So that's why, looking at these in sandbox is kind of the way to go right now. And then the beginning of the following week, the week of the 25th, is when we plan on sending out paper 1098, doing our printing job of paper 1098Ts, which I think we looked, and it looks like we'll be sending out about 2,300 paper 1098Ts as it currently stands. So that means that we have, I think there are about 6,800, maybe I'm remembering a little bit off, but in the 6,000 somewhere of 1098Ts that we're generating, and about 2,300 of those are getting paper, did not consent to electronic. So the majority of our students did consent to electronic delivery. If a student did not consent to electronic delivery, they still have the same electronic access in Workday. So it doesn't suppress their ability to get electronic versions in Workday if they didn't consent to only electronic delivery. So anybody can go into Workday and view their 1098T.
Kevin, I've got a question. So we are planning to send a communication out on Monday, the 25th to, which you have a link to that email campaign on the agenda that Monique developed. But that has the undergrad contact information, undergrad SFS office. Is there a way to get the email addresses split out between everybody that is going to have a 1098T that includes former students, separating GPS from TUG so that the GPS team can send out an email with their contact information, and we send it out with the TUG information so that we have the same information. Thank you, Monique, for putting it all together. Marianne, your team could use that template, but we want to obviously have different contact information. Do you know if we can get those separate email addresses, Kevin?
I think so. Melissa, do you think we'll have any issue with separating, getting their, what their most current academic record would be? I don't know.
I do already pull in their I already pull in their academic level from their primary program of study, but I'm not pulling in whether or not that's College of Extended Learning or traditional undergrad. So I'll have to add that to the report.
Is that a big deal? Is that, Melissa, to do
I'm
that?
actively working on the report right now. So
Okay, that would be.
I mean, I
that would
already
be,
pull, because we have to know, so that would only be for the people that are in Workday, Kevin, so the CX only people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have their information. Do you get what I'm saying? So for the majority of, if they're active in Workday for fall or spring, then they likely are going to be on the Workday report. But if this is for last summer and they didn't continue on in Workday, then they're not going to be on my Workday report.
Because they're not active anymore?
Yeah, the Workday report is only pulling in people that have charges and payments in Workday. So they have to have charges or payments in Workday. not, I mean, it's not just, not only, if they only have net conversion payments and charges, they're not on the Workday report.
Okay.
So you're still gonna have
Yes.
to get CX people.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, we can take, I mean, it's good to, know that we want to do that, Cindy, and we'll take a look at it and,
Okay. Thank you.
and shoot for that. I was trying to remember on the 1098T side, because it's kind of it's a university function, if we had in the past separated out the communications, because I know, as far as generating and filing and all that stuff, it's, it's the whole group, but I couldn't remember on the communication side if we had split out the populations. So.
Well, I mean, if it's hard to split them out, we could change the email and include,
Or add just add the GPS
contact
information.
But that does raise the question of how are we getting email addresses for the CX people that will have a 1098T if they're not in Workday?
Well, they're in Workday. It's just a question of what we're going off of, because all of these students, there are a handful, there's 14 students right now that we're working with ITS that did not have adequate or any Workday login, but it sounds like these might just be CashNet prepay people, and we may not need to give them a 1098T anyway. So, all of the,
I guess my question is more about getting the email addresses for those CX only students. They're in Workday, obviously, with their 1098T, but we've got to get them these instructions.
Once their 1098T is created in Workday, Cindy, we can then report off of that data. So once these overrides exist, then it's very easy to pull in a report and say, here's the students that have a 1098T in Workday. Here's their institutional email address or personal email address.
Okay.
Here's whether or not it was printed or electronic. Like, all of that information is available to us. So if it's before we load this information, like a communication before the load,
it'd be
it's a little bit more difficult.
It's after. We're going to do it the last week of that last Monday, the 25th. So it'll be after the load.
Then that will be very easy to report off of in Workday.
And you can report separately GPS and awesome. So then we can have two different emails going out. So all the contact information will be clear for the TUG versus GPS students. That'd be great. Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah, cool. Anything else? I know we're 6 minutes over right now, so I want to be respectful of everybody's
This has
time,
been very helpful, Kevin. Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions, anybody?
If you guys have feedback on that email and would prefer other things to be listed, or like have any feedback on the way it's formatted, please let me know so we can adjust that. And then we can send a separate campaign from GPS's main email and SFS's main email so that it's directed towards those inboxes and with the proper contact info.
Cool. Thanks for throwing that together.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, if we have no further questions, I think we're good. I hope this was helpful for everyone. I think I say this every single time I have a meeting, but the work that has gone into this, Kevin and Melissa, is really remarkable. And we're so thankful that you guys are in this spot and making this happen for us.
It's helpful to have a reporting wizard on the team, Melissa.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. Have a great Friday and a great long weekend.
Thank
you too. Bye.
Bye.